Hello everyone and welcome. Sawubona Dumelang. It is my delight to welcome you to the last of our VC's reading groups for this year. Our VC, Prof Tshilidzi Marwala, is a man who is a prolific reader, a prolific writer, and a prolific walker. So he often reminds me of Immanuel Kant in the depth of his thinking and the kilometers that he walks every day. So if you're wondering how to progress in your academic career, maybe the way forward is read more and walk more. Professor Marwala, the introduction that I gave is meant as a compliment. I suddenly realized that it might have come off a little bit wrong. But this year, you have really helped all of us to stretch our thinking, to broaden the way that we see the world. And in the spirit of the VC reading groups that we've had this year, which have really challenged us to think about the world that we live in and the times that we live in, we are ending our VC reading groups for this year with The Tale of Two Cities. The introduction of this book is one that you will all recognize. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And in some ways, that's exactly what COVID has been for many of us. The worst of times, but also an amazing time of change. And I think that this particular book, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, is really a brilliant book to be ending the year with, because it's a book about turbulence, it's a book about change, it's a book about uncertainty, and it's a book about how societies can transform themselves. I must say that our Vice Chancellor, Professor Marwala, reminds me also a little bit of Charles Dickens. While we have come to know of Charles Dickens as this very prolific writer, which of course Professor Marwala is, Charles Dickens was also somebody who profoundly changed the discourse of the day. This book, like all his other works, are in essence a critique about the Victorian era. But he didn't just critique the time that he was living in, he had an enormous impact on that time. And if you think of A Christmas Carol, it is a book that actually shaped the way we experience modern Christmas. And in many ways, Professor Marwala, the work that you've been doing over the last number of years has been shaping the way we understand the zeitgeist, the way that we are in the world at this particular moment. And so it is my delight and pleasure to hand over to you. Just to remind all those participating, please put your comments and questions in the chat. Professor Marwala is going to address us with an overview of the book and then some of his ideas around the book and its impact on our lives today. And then we are going to open up for a questions and answer session. We won't have live questions. In other words, you won't be able to actually speak. We're inviting everyone to please post their questions in the online chat. And then I will take those questions and read them out, and Prof Marwala will answer them all. So with that introduction, Professor Marwala, over to you.
Thank you, Maria, for organizing this. I must say, I have really enjoyed this year and the reading to this community. It is arguably one of the most popular phrases to come out of literary works. Politicians, business people, scholars, and ordinary folks alike have at some point quoted it, often with misrepresentations, when they seek solace from particular crises or when they wish to inspire others. Charles Dickens probably had no idea how the opening lines of his novel, A Tale of Two Cities, would become such a classic quote. and I quote, "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only." Close quote. This was obviously the art of dialectics, the art of presenting a picture and its opposite, and how the two synthesize to form the reality as we see it. I think it might have been Marx when he talks about the thesis. It might even be before then, one of the German philosophers, the antithesis, and you combine the two and you get the synthesis. And obviously the synthesis is really what we get out of this book. When Charles Dickens wrote the novel, it was simply put a time of great contradiction as the French Revolution took hold. Set between the 1770s and the 1790s, Dickens weaves a tale against the French Revolution's political backdrop and the reign of terror. The story begins against the backdrop of great social ills in London and Paris. Lucy Manet's father, Dr. Manet, is jailed for 18 years at the Bastille for the cover-up of the rape and killing of Madame Defarge's sister and brother by the Evermont family. At that point, the French society was divided into three sectors. They were called estates. You had the first estate, which were the rulers, the kings, and the duchies, and all those people. Then you had the second estate, which was the clergy, and then you had the third estate, which was the common man. And in that setup, the aristocrats could actually get somebody arrested for no other reason except the fact that they were not happy with that person. So Lucy, who moves to London and becomes an orphan, is raised by Miss Pross, an Englishwoman. Lucy's mother evidently was also an Englishwoman. Her father was French. And later on, when she was an old woman of about 17, she's eventually told that her father is actually still alive by Jarvis Lorry, a banker from Tellson Bank, who serves as a trustee of the Manet family. The two, Jarvis and Miss Manet, go to Paris to find Lucy's father, Dr. Manet, now a shoemaker living with Monsieur and Madame Lafarge, who support the French Revolution. Before Dr. Manet, who was a doctor, was arrested, Mr. Monsieur Lafarge used to work for him. Now, Madame Lafarge and Monsieur Lafarge actually own a wine shop. To show the state of being at the time, Dickens talks about when these big containers that carry wines, I don't know whether they're called kegs, while they were being taken off the cart, it spilled over, it fell to the ground, and it burst. And everybody ran to come and drink wine from the floor. And one of the people who were doing that takes the wine, goes and writes on the wall, blood. Of course, Monsieur Lafarge was not impressed, because this was during the time in which Charles XIV was still in power. So Lucy arrives here at this old apartment to meet her father for the first time, and to learn for the first time that she is actually not an orphan, that her father is actually still alive. The theme of the book is brought to life, brought back to life. So in essence, her father, who had been dead and buried for 18 years, in her mind, had just been resurrected. And this concept of resurrection actually goes on in this book. So Lucy brings her father to London. In London, she falls in love with Charles Dickens. Earlier in his life, as a member of the Evermont family, Charles was so repulsed by the ruling class excesses that he abandons his titles and moves to London to live of his own effort. A story that is described in the book, describing how these excesses are, is a story about Charles' uncle, Marquis St. Evermont, start killing a young child, and in exchange, the Marquis throws a coin, a gold coin, on the floor as a compensation. The young boy who was killed's father was Gaspard. Gaspard later on gets into the Marquis' house and kills him, stabs him, and he is hanged for that. Now in London, Charles is arrested in a conspiracy that was facilitated by a spy going by the name John Passat for espionage, but is saved because his lawyer's colleague, Sidney Carton, looks like him. Of course, again, this is another theme of Charles on the jaws of being convicted and being hanged, is brought back to life. Passat, of course, had a real name, which was Solomon Pross, and had been a spy for the king, and after the king was disposed, became the spy for the revolutionaries. So this Passat is a man of all seasons. As the peasants in Paris stormed the Bastille and the French Revolution begins to unfold, and the revolutionaries kill the aristocrats in the streets, Charles learns that Gabelle, who used to work for the Evermont family, has been jailed by the revolutionaries and would like to be saved by Charles. This was during the reign of terror of Maximilien Robespierre, the man who is most associated with the terror of that time. Charles goes back to France to save Gabelle, but is arrested and is put on trial. Of course, Lucy and her father, who now live in London, now by this time, Lucy and Charles are married and they have a daughter. They come to Paris to try to save him. Due to the respect that Dr. Manet commands among the revolutionaries for his time, his 18 years that he spent in the Bastille as a convicted political prisoner, Charles is acquitted. Later, he is rearrested because Madame Defarge is hell-bent on destroying the Evermont family, including Lucy and their child. The reason why Madame Defarge was so hell-bent on destroying Charles and the family is because the young lady who was raped and killed, and the young boy who was killed, not the one who was killed on the street, but was killed on the other occasion, were actually siblings of Madame Defarge. In the twist of the story, so he's acquitted. So Charles is acquitted. And a day later, Charles is rearrested because Madame Defarge and her husband, Monceau, have denounced Charles. And there is a third person who has denounced Charles. And this is Dr. Manet. So Dr. Manet now, allegedly, is denouncing his own son-in-law. Of course, he was not denouncing him then. He had denounced him when he was still in jail. He had written a letter that he hid in the room, and the Monceau Defarge found it during the storming of the Bastille, where he had said, "I condemn the family, the Evermont family, and all their descendants for putting him in prison," because he was put in prison by the Evermont family. So Charles is then sentenced to death. He's sentenced to death to meet the device that is named after Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine. Of course, we know about the guillotine, the blade that was angled, that was used to kill people during the reign of terror of Maximilian Robespierre. And he was going to meet the hangman, Charles Henry Samson. Charles Henry Samson is alleged to have killed approximately 3,000 people during the reign of terror through the guillotine. But with the help of John Passat, remember John Passat was the person who had accused Charles in London of espionage. But now that it has been found that he is working for the revolutionary and used to work for the kings, he is persuaded to take to go and save Charles. So Sidney, who looks very much like Charles, makes his way into prison with John and swaps his identity with that of Charles. And Charles and his family flee back to London. Again, Charles is brought back to life. Sidney meets his death in the guillotine, and when he was guillotined, it was as if the person who was being guillotined was Charles. Madame Lafarge is shot by her own gun in a scuffle with Miss Pross. So Dickens' historical fiction is an indicative of the effects of the revolution. The French Revolution was a violent transition from a feudal society to a democratic society based on the people's will. It led to the abolishment of slavery in the French colony. With Robespierre at the helm, it betrayed his own call of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But many think that the violence of the Reign of Terror, which is described in Dickens' book, was a necessary pain to achieve a democratic society. Now that we are transitioning into the fourth industrial revolution, the question is, are we moving to high-tech feudalism where the tech mandarins replace the aristocrats and the clergy? To paraphrase Dickens, the fourth industrial revolution represents the best of times, when artificial intelligence can do many useful things, such as performing medical diagnostics better than human beings. On the other hand, it also represents the worst of times, where it can harm human beings by doing terrible deeds, such as undermining democracy and truth. The 4IR represents the age of wisdom, where we can use AI for drug discovery and augmenting our own intelligence. However, the 4IR is also ushering in an age of foolishness, where AI is used to fake prominent people in pornographic settings where they never were. The 4IR is ushering the epoch of belief by expanding and accessing spiritual infrastructure through online churches. On the other hand, it is also ushering the epoch of incredulity, where the digital platforms are increasing the proliferation of spiritual leaders whose aim is to enrich themselves and exploit people's naivety. The 4IR is a season of light, where, like Elon Musk's company Neuralink, we can install devices that unlock and augment our brains. Alternatively, it is ushering the season of darkness, where we can use these devices to control people and take away free will. In the 4IR, China and the US are emerging as two AI superpowers. Nature tends to converge into two. In his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Dan Kahneman claims that our minds have two systems, one that acts fast and is impulsive, and another which acts slow and is reflective. We have 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 feet, and 2 hands. During the nuclear age and the Cold War, the world converged into 2 superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union. The emergence of 2 AI superpowers, the US and China, will be consequential for the future of our civilization. In capitalist countries such as the United States, the rich, especially the techno-billionaires, will yield unprecedented powers to determine many fates. This is fundamentally undemocratic, as these techno-billionaires are not elected by anyone. On the other hand, in communist countries like China, the state becomes extraordinarily powerful The countries that are not in the AI game will become economically forgotten and will become poorer. It will be a tale of two worlds. What are we in South Africa doing about this to avoid the ensuing economic guillotine and prevent an era of economic terror? Last month, the South African cabinet accepted the recommendations of the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Accordingly, to avoid the brunt of the tale of two worlds, we have to invest in human capacity development in areas of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, such as AI, blockchain, the Internet of Things, and many other 4R skills. Secondly, we need to establish the National AI Institute that should focus on applying this technology to all our economic sectors. We have to use the 4R technology to improve competitiveness in our manufacturing sectors. We have to invest in data for good to stimulate innovation. Additionally, we have to incentivize the adoption of technologies, especially for our technologies, and build infrastructure to facilitate data and technology available to make sense of our world. Furthermore, we have to create laws that enable 4IR and strengthen implementation capacity. We risk falling prey to the dark underside of a revolution if we do not swiftly act, just as it did during the French Revolution. History is once again turning in a manner we have not seen before. As we ponder the paradoxical nature of a revolution, we must ask what our own story will look like in the face of tremendous advancements that lie in front of our eyes. Frankly, whether this is the best of times or the worst of times is entirely up to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Marwala. I wonder if you, Professor Marwala, could comment a little bit further on Hegel's art of dialectics, which Charles Dickens uses so well to frame his book. So as you were saying, Hegel has this idea that two opposites come together and they synthesize and they form something new. But the whole of Dickens' book, which you have so elegantly summarized, which was just an amazing feat, because there are so many characters, as I said earlier, not just the people, but also the places act as characters in these books. And so Hegel begins with this idea of the dialectic, the best of and the worst of, and proceeds to write a very complicated story, which in many ways highlights the complexity of human nature, the complexity of life. And so my question is, how helpful is it for us to think in the idea of dialectics when we live in a country as complex and multifaceted as South Africa, particularly as South Africa tries to embrace the fourth industrial revolution?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, the issue of dialectics is actually a very complex philosophical issue. The existence of the two that interact to form the third and the repeat of the cycle has been used well and has often also been misused. It is probably the fundamental building block of the whole theory of historical materialism that Karl Marx actually came up with.
Yes.
You know, the history of the world, if I were to quote him, is the history of class struggle. The struggle between the owners of the means of production and the workers is and the synthesis of this and the repeat of that cycle is basically, according to Marx, it leads to the scientific view of history, you know. And then if you go to science, you know, and science does not necessarily exist in dialectics. Science does allow other existence. Just so happens that we are communicating in dialectical form because we are using ones and zeros. We are using two states to communicate. That's how the internet works. That is how the computers work. But you know, it does not necessarily mean that we can't communicate in more than two states. You know, so but I think the reason why this Hegelian view, and in fact, I wouldn't even think of it as just Hegelian, because if you go even before, during Aristotle's time, you know, the concept of dialectics was actually there. You know, the reason why it became so attractive is because as human beings we have very simple minds. If I give you two balls to balance, you probably can do it. If I give you 7, you won't do it unless you are very well trained in that particular skill. You know, so for me, I would say that the dialectical view of the world is basically the simplification of the world, simply because our brains have not evolved to be able to handle multiple dimensions. You know, in fact, if you wanted to when Newton, when Einstein was formulating his theory of gravitation, he realizes that he needed more than just 2 dimensions. And for us to be able to do that, we need to, because we can't actually perceive it with our own eyes. You know, our own eyes cannot see 4 dimensions. It can see 3 dimensions, but not more. You know, he invented tensor calculus to be able to do that. And we have invented tools to allow us to at least make sense of things that we would otherwise not be able to make sense with our own eyes and our own perception. So we invent tools, but just because we have invented tools does not necessarily mean that it changes minds, the way our minds has been constructed through the laws of evolution to be able to perceive things as simple as possible. Thank you.
I think that was a wonderful answer and a wonderful way of helping us to understand dialectics and its role in the way we think about the world. We have a question. So what was Charles Dickens's attitude towards the French Revolution? Does he sympathize with the revolutionaries?
Well, I mean, obviously, if I were to take Charles Dickens as an entity, no, this is not the first book that I've read about Charles Dickens. I did read Oliver Twist. You know, I did read Oliver Twist. It is clear that he was not happy with that world that was sending 11-year-olds to go and work in underground coal mines. It is clear that he was a critic of the excesses of the ruling class. Certainly, if you read Oliver Twist, that comes across. You know, it is clear that he understood that the way things are is not the way things are supposed to be. But in this book, it is clear that he is actually quite happy with the political situation in England, that the revolution in England is actually has achieved what it was supposed to achieve. Because if you have to understand the context, when the French Revolution happened and the French people took Charles XIV to the guillotine and his wife, Marie Antoinette, and started calling everybody citizen. The British people had done that thing almost 100 years earlier. The thing that people do not actually appreciate is that in Western Europe, the first country to actually get rid of the monarchy was not France, it was England. England was the first country to get rid of the monarchy. And they did not just get rid of the monarchy, they put their king on trial, exactly as the French revolutionaries actually did. And they went and voted as members of parliament in the House of Commons as to whether Charles I lives or dies, exactly as it happened in the French Revolution. The parliament voted that Charles had to go, and Charles was publicly executed just the same way as this other person. Of course, the difference is that the guillotine versus the sword that killed Charles I. So already the political situation in England was a compromised situation where the excesses of the ruling class, which existed definitely, were not to the same extent as the excesses of the French Revolution. So to answer your question, he actually thinks there was something good about the French Revolution, but there was something bad about the French Revolution. So that is why he is painting that whole epoch as a contradiction of two different things coexisting at the same time. It was the best of time, it was the worst of time. All of it is happening at the same time. And so he obviously liked the fact, because nobody could, it was clear that the aristocracy and the clergy had to go. But the way it went, I mean, for those of you who have actually studied the French Revolution, it became very violent, and Robespierre invented his own religion, where it was a spectacle when it was unleashed. I think it is called, this is the religion of reason or something like that, the cult of reason or something like that.
Cult of reason.
And so on and so forth. And these revolutionaries wanted to de-Christianize the French society, And in a way, the French people, their reformation was much more, it went the other way around. And now, after the fact, because we know what happened in the French Revolution, before the French Revolution, the French Revolution started with a king and ended with an emperor. It ended with an emperor. That was not the plan. The plan was it to end as a democracy like the United States. So and it would not have escaped Charles Dickens in that regard.
So following on from this discussion, I'm going to jump a little bit further down in the questions. There is a question around the French Revolution and revolutions and violence. So must democracies and revolutions be won through violence? And what does this mean for a fourth industrial revolution?
Well, the answer to me, now I'm speaking about me as a person, the answer is no. I don't think, I actually think that violence is simply not the correct instrument of effecting any form of change. You know, maybe let me go back. Violence should not be the first option in effecting any form of change. But then there comes a time when something important can only be resolved through violence. I'll give you an example. The Second World War. The Second World War and the fall of Nazism in Germany. It couldn't have been done any other way. It couldn't have been done any other way except through war. You know, and when Churchill came into being and inspired the British people, never have so many given so much for so few. We will fight them in the beaches, we will fight them at sea, we shall never surrender. It was inspiring stuff. And it was against a civilization that was going to be very destructive to all of us. So I would have supported the participation in the Second World War. One of the untold story about that war is that I lost a family member. One family member came. I don't know where they went, but they couldn't hear when they come back. So wherever they went, it was I suppose maybe North Africa, you know, Homer's Desert Storm. So, and then if we come to our own situation, Nelson Mandela, Madiba, our own Madiba. When you think of Madiba, you think of a peaceful man. And he had peaceful inclinations. But again, a time came to him where he had no choice but to resort to violence, even though it was a different type of violence because it was targeted at infrastructure rather than people, you know. So yes, I think if the evil that needs to be removed it cannot be removed any other way except through violence, I think I can be able to understand that. You know. Now, your other question is, can violence be used to achieve a particular society? Now, if we go to Cambodia, Pol Pot, he wanted to go to year zero, removed everybody from the cities and took them to the countryside. If you are found wearing glasses, you are going to be killed. You know, he wanted some form of a society. I don't know what kind of a society he wanted to create. That I think I know it cannot be justified in any other way. If you look at the French society, I mean, the guillotine was like, you know, it was a violence. I mean, you had people who go to the National Assembly and say, terror, I want 10,000 more heads. I mean, that is, you know, that is bloodthirsty and must be removed from any part of our society. Even it's necessary.
So, Prof Marwala, following on that, we have another question. Prof, has it not been a tale of two worlds already, the global north and global south, the developed and the underdeveloped, the haves and the have-nots, the ruling elites and the subalternized working class. The high levels of inequalities could be indicating that it is indeed the worst of times.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you, you know, that, that when you look at the world, it probably is qualitatively better than 400 years ago, when slavery was legal in some parts of the world. You know, when if you had superior military power, you could just walk into a place, find people there, and install your flag, and you say, "Now I am in charge." You know, those things would not happen in that fashion. Probably they will happen in a much more sophisticated manner. So yes, there are lots of things that we need to still achieve as a society to reach a point where we can say we have a fairer world. You know, the political upheaval that we see people. Now we are talking about the elections in United States. You know, the vile nature of the pursuit of power for its own sake is something that tells us that yes, it is also the worst of times. At the same time that it is the best of times. If you look at life expectancies, it's probably the best of times. You know, if you look at the number of people who are on the verge of starvation, you might find out that we are actually better off than maybe 800 years ago or 500 years ago.
Right. Another question. VC, great presentation. Revolutions bring destruction, but also the potential for radical progressive change. What main lessons do you think the book has to offer us, particularly in view of this post-COVID period in which class inequalities are deepening?
I think we have to be vigilant. I think we have to be vigilant when changes are happening. Your eyes must actually be all open. Because if you look at the French Revolution, Robespierre was only there for 1 year as a leader. You know, he was a leader of the Committee of Public Safety that was created by the National Assembly. And during his reign of terror, I think about a third of the members of the National Assembly were actually killed in the guillotine. You know, these are effectively the people who gave him power. You know, in other words, you need to be vigilant. And secondly, always avoid concentrating power in a single center of power. One of my biggest criticism of our own democracy is the fact that we lack sufficient political diversity in our political system, and as a result, we do not have the advantages of what Markowitz, in his Nobel Prize-winning theory, calls portfolio theory. The fact that if you have a basket of solutions, they are always better than one. You know, multiple heads are always better than one. You know, so that centers of power can check one another, and that's basically what happened. Robespierre was effectively became the ruler, and as Marx put it, history repeats itself first as a farce, and was talking about the first French Revolution, the one that Charles Dickens is writing about, and second as a tragedy. The second one, because there was a second revolution, because the monarchy came back to France after Napoleon.
Considering that all revolutions have been underpinned by war to enforce transformation, does this mean the 4IR will have the same impact? Or will the 4IR constitute violence in terms of people losing their jobs for creating a space for machines to be utilized on those particular types of jobs, such as blue-collar jobs?
No, absolutely. I think the 4IRs will be accompanied by violence. It won't be physical violence. It will be other forms of violence. Already we have seen how the fourth industrial revolution is being used to undermine democracy. That's violence. It's not physical violence, but it is violence when I can be able to manipulate you to be able to act sometimes against your own interest because of technology. Recently, I read a book, Deep Fakes, about generative adversarial networks that are able to, I can be able to take your picture and put it in a video in a compromising position, and nobody will be able to tell. I can even make you speak as you would speak, things that you actually did not say. That is another form of violence. It's not a physical violence. You don't see blood, certainly not directly. But ultimately, it is going to be violent, and that is why it is important. Every revolution is violent. What we ought to do is to make sure that we put mechanisms into place to regulate these technologies that are emerging right in front of our eyes.
Mm. And then we have another question. As young African leaders, what lessons should we take from the story, and how can we implement these lessons in today's realities?
I think tomorrow I'm going to be hosting here at UJ at Madibeng, former President Thabo Mbeki. It's going to be coming here with young people. And one of the things that he took from A Tale of Two Cities is his story of two societies. I think two nations. Once said this story. He was quite criticized. I think that's very, very important for us to realize that South Africa is actually two nations existing as one. While we have people here who are at the University of Johannesburg having world-class education, they are more than half of the people who never even make it past matric, who are just sitting in our townships, in our villages, with no future in sight. And I think it is important for us to be able to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge that it is a problem that has to be sorted out through our own effort. There was, I think it was the Time magazine article that shows a picture of Alexander and Sandton alongside each other. One looks like it was in a completely different country. Another one looks like it was taken in the first world country, but in the same country, So one of the things that we should take is that inequality is real in our lives, and we need to tackle it. Power must always be contained. Power corrupts. I think it was Lord Acton. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. That we always have to be vigilant when people are given power, and so on and so forth.
We have time for one last question, and the question is, Prof, we understand that power doesn't exist in a vacuum, and Marx expands on contradictions that lead to new developments. In this sense, the replacement of the feudal system. However, How do we safeguard against those who contest for power using the masses' struggles as a guise to overthrow the current stronghold and take power for themselves in the sense of the 4IR?
Well, I mean, we will have to do regulations because, one person once put it very well. He says one of the principal characteristics of a good politician in terms of winning elections is that person who is able to make his own problems or his own ambition the ambition of the nation. So we always have to be wary. We have to educate ourselves. We have to understand the world as much as possible so that we do not fall victims of the developments around us and we are taken advantage of.
Professor Marwala, this has been yet another insightful session. I think from the questions, you can see just how engaged people were in the session and how much it's given us things to think about. Thank you so much for the reading group today and for the reading groups that we've had with you all year. It really is a privilege to have a Vice Chancellor who makes himself available once a month, who shares his ideas in such an engaged platform, and who helps us think about the world that we live in, historically, in the context of now, and in the context of the future that we are yet to embrace. So thank you very much for this year and for these wonderful reading groups and how much we've learned from you and also been able to learn from each other. So on that note, I say goodbye to you, Prof Marwala, and to all those who have tuned in. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Stay well and stay safe.
Thank you very much, and all the best for the rest of the year. And thank you very much, Maria, for organizing all this.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.